Hello, this is Dr. Marty Klein. Today I want to discuss the burning question of should lying on Tinder be illegal? Yes, law school professor Irina Monta has proposed that lying on dating apps like Tinder in order to make sex more likely should be criminalized. Yes, in both a Washington Post op-ed and a law journal article, Monta says that such lying undermines other people's ability to truly consent to sex. In doing so, I'm afraid she redefines adulthood, dating, sexuality, and communication. Now, anyone who dates or hooks up online knows how it works. More than half of all the profiles include deliberate lies. Many of the profiles contain outdated photos. People often describe themselves using glowing superlatives like world's best cook or delightful to be with that do not quite match how they really are. And many men and women say that they're interested in love and romance and commitment when they actually want, or at least are open to, casual sex after barely meeting. These are the facts. If you date online and you've never experienced any of these facts, you certainly know somebody who has. I wonder why people don't adjust their expectations and decision making accordingly. Now, if you've never dated online but you use social media, there shouldn't be any surprises anyway. Social media were apparently invented so that people could misrepresent themselves or could express themselves without the normal consequences of face-to-face life and could manipulate each other, whether by aggression or a seduction or a strategic omission. Professor Monta's suggestion points up some serious problems with society's current approach to dating and courtship and sex. It's clearly part of a larger trend that's just getting more and more extreme. Monta's concept of sexual fraud removes the expectation that people are responsible for their own sexual interactions. Of course, I am not talking about blaming rape victims. Monta is clearly not talking about sexual coercion or violence, and neither am I. Rather, her proposal attempts to protect people from the rhythms of modern courtship, rather than encouraging them to develop and use their internal resources. Infantilizing the dating population instead of empowering them, I think, is a big mistake. Besides, criminalizing lying to get sex demonizes sex. It reinforces the idea that sleeping with someone you wish you hadn't is much different, in fact, is worse, than, say, playing a sport that you shouldn't. Remember, there are millions of strained hamstrings every year. Or, say, sharing gossip that you shouldn't. True enough, social media makes it easier than ever for people to meet other people they may have sex with. If sex is trivial, which is fine with me, that isn't a problem. And while most people say that sex is intimate, special, very personal, many men and women behave as if it's trivial. Again, that's okay with me. But if people claim that sex is grand, which is fine with me, then they should pay more attention to whom they sleep with and under what circumstances. Historically, most cultures around the world have encouraged people to know each other or commit to each other before having sex. I would not make this mandatory. The cult of virginity until marriage continues to damage people and marriages around the world. But neither would I discard the idea that if people are prone to regret certain sexual interactions, they need to get better at sniffing out those potential interactions ahead of time. On the one hand, preventing people from lying to each other won't accomplish this. On the other hand, there's no substitute for people developing their own judgment about who to trust in what situation. It's easy to see our smartphone culture as a culprit in this. As people spend less and less time communicating face-to-face, we're arguably developing less and less skill in evaluating other people. Look at the common idea that you can know someone and communicate effectively via digital tools. This illusion carries over into sex. We texted a few times, therefore I know the person well enough to judge whether or not to have sex with them. Professor Monta suggests that complaints of being victimized by a lying Tinderite or Grindrite be handled in small claims court. But once lying to get laid is criminalized even a tiny bit, it won't be hard to increase the penalties or to create subcategories of lying and even worse lying and major lying. Ultimately, Those people convicted of lying to get laid might even end up on the sex offender registry. Sound absurd? Remember, the registry was never intended to be a punishment or a public safety resource for convictions of things like public urination or exhibitionism. And yet, today, that sex offender registration across the U.S. is filled with exactly just such nonviolent convictions. It was never intended to punish teenagers, but over 200,000 people on it were placed there as minors. Now, an online dating profile is not a binding contract. It's an advertisement. And as with all ads, caveat emptor, which means let the buyer beware. Anyone who doesn't approach dating apps that way has no business using a dating app. Of course, those same people were vulnerable to seduction or manipulation in the dating market in the thousands of years before the internet. The coming-of-age film Saturday Night Fever shows just how this worked among working-class people back in the 70s. And anyone who thinks that people interested in people who are interested in sex need protection is really saying that dating is too dangerous to allow adults to do it unsupervised. No one likes being manipulated or feeling used or getting their heart broken. And yet, if someone is completely protected from these things or is too walled off to risk those kinds of outcomes, they can't experience real adulthood, they can't grow, and they can't be passionate. For people who crave one of those or two of those or all three of those, government protection and personal walls are just too expensive. I'm Dr. Marty Klein. Thanks for joining me.